When people think about revolutions in warfare, they imagine the first jet engines, the first nuclear test, Sputnik in orbit, the first Gulf War with laser-guided bombs on CNN. Those moments came with fanfare, a sense that history had just shifted. But the most consequential shift in warfare since the nuclear age arrived quietly, through little workshops, YouTube tutorials, Telegram channels, and cheap components sourced online. It arrived via teenagers, militias, smugglers, and small companies improvising with hardware that costs less than a nice phone. The US Air Force's newest fighter jet costs $110 million a piece, and there are 187 of them on order. Ukraine will produce more combat drones next year than that, thousands more, and still have change for coffee. This revolution arrived as the drone. Not just the big gray predators and reapers, though those were part of the early story, and 30 years ago, they were very secret. We're talking about the cheap, expendable, modified, improvised flying machines that anybody can buy, hack, and deploy. Welcome to Global Risk Profile, where we break down the headlines that matter and the ones that should. If you want to see the future of conflict, you don't have to look at the Chinese air shows or the US defense white papers. You just have to look at the messy improvisational front lines of Gaza, southern Lebanon, Ukraine, the Sinai, the US-Mexico border, etc. Because in these places, something unprecedented is already visible. Instability begins at the level of machines. As autonomy increases, that instability will climb the ladder, from tactical to operational, from small incidents to crisis between great powers, potentially. During the 2023-2024 fighting around Gaza and on Israel's northern border, drones were everywhere. Hezbollah and Hamas used small surveillance quadcopters, race-style FPVs rigged as flying bombs, and more sophisticated one-way attack drones. Israel responded with jammers, interceptors, lasers, and its own drones. The picture that emerges is not a tidy duel between two doctrines. It's a constant low-level swarm of cheap flying machines, some under tight control, some not. Many of the dangerous moments were not deliberate. For example, a drone gets blown off course by wind. Another loses its radio link because a jammer starts up and flew 100 meters away. Another enters an automatic return to home mode and crosses an invisible line that one side considers a red line and the other doesn't even know it exists. Each of those tiny events can create a few seconds of ambiguity. Somebody looking up at the sky or watching a video feed has to answer in real time. Is this a probe? Is this an attack? A malfunction? A decoy? Those seconds, those tiny windows of confusion could become micro-crisis. They force soldiers and officers into snap judgments with potentially strategic consequences. Even before full-blown autonomy, the air is already full of what you could call accidental signals. Gaza and Lebanon give us the outline of the problem. Ukraine shows us the problem at scale. Ukraine is the first major war where cheap drones saturate almost every part of the battlefield. FPV drones scream into tanks and trenches. Small quadcopters hover over infantry, hunting for any exposed movement. Loitering munitions orbit until they find the right target. Long-range drones hit infrastructures hundreds of kilometers away. Russian electronic warfare knocks down Ukrainian drones, and Ukrainian electronic warfare returns the favor. Each side is constantly probing the other side's air defenses and jamming patterns. And crucially, a huge share of what happens in the air is not being micromanaged by colonels in a bunker. It's happening at the edge, on the tablets of small units, in ad hoc workshops, and increasingly inside the software running on the drones themselves. A recent analysis by RAIN, the risk and intelligence firm that grew out of the old Stratfor model, captured this shift in one sentence. The Russia-Ukraine war has highlighted how accessible, cost-effective technologies, particularly drones, are reshaping modern warfare. Drones have become central instruments of cost imposition, allowing Ukraine to inflict disproportionate damage on a materially stronger adversary at a fraction of the cost of traditional weapon systems. That's the polite and analytical way of saying a few $100s of plastic and electronics can kill millions of dollars worth of armor. And once that's true, the side that can build, adapt, and field drones faster in greater numbers with better software and better integration starts to gain a very different kind of advantage. The RAIN piece also stresses that the real edge comes not from any single wonder drone, but from production rate, interoperability, and rapid technical adaptation, the ability to change tactics, code, and hardware in weeks, not in years. Have you ever heard of such purchase cycles in traditional military political machines? This is a machine speed evolution, and Ukraine is showing us that traditional human speed institutions are already struggling to keep up. If Gaza and Ukraine show drones in wartime, borders show them in peacetime, and that's just as revealing. On the US-Mexico border, cartels use drones to scout patrols, carry drugs, and stage distractions. On the Israel-Egypt border, smugglers have adopted drones to move weapons, drugs, and other contraband at night over the fence and back. In November 2025, the Israeli Defense Forces ATS division reported that it had thwarted about 130 drone-assisted smuggling attempts in a single month along the Egyptian border, seizing dozens of weapons in the process. That's not a laboratory test. That's a live adversarial environment where both sides are learning and improvising. Border forces deploy counter-drone radars, cameras, jammers, sometimes interceptors. Smugglers respond by changing altitude, flying low and slow against the terrain, sending decoy drones, varying timing, and relying on pre-programmed routes that don't need a live pilot. These are not great powers, they're criminals, but they are proving a hard truth. The building blocks of machine speed conflict are cheap, global, and already in the hands of the least constrained actors. Put these three examples together, and a pattern emerges. Instability is already emerging from the behavior of large numbers of cheap, semi-autonomous machines. And as we add more autonomy, that instability becomes faster and harder to manage. To understand how deep that problem goes, we have to look at why drones force autonomy on us in the first place. For roughly a century now, better military capability mostly meant more expensive. Better fighters, better tanks, better missiles. Each generation costs more than the last. You could argue with the procurement, but the basic pattern was clear. More sophistication, higher price tag, smaller fleets. Drones changed that pattern. It's no longer science fiction to say that a $500 or $1,000 FPV drone can destroy or disable a vehicle worth millions. A swarm of cheap aerial and surface drones, if used cleverly, can threaten warships that cost billions. RAIN's Ukraine analysis points out that drones have become central instruments of cost imposition, enabling a smaller, poorer state or actor to impose sustained losses on a larger one at a fraction of the price of the systems being destroyed. Once that cost curve breaks, scale comes next. If a serious armored vehicle costs a few $1 million and a kamikaze drone costs a few hundred, one side can afford to field drones in industrial quantities. We're not talking tens, we're talking thousands, and soon enough, millions. That leads directly to the second shift. When you have hundreds or thousands of drones in the air, humans physically cannot micromanage everyone, like the previous generation of Predators or Reapers, where you had an actual pilot with a joystick. No human operator can hand fly 50 drones in a swarm, react to jamming in milliseconds, reroute each drone individually in a dynamic environment, or monitor every camera feed in real time. So you start delegating. You let the drones avoid collisions by themselves. You let onboard systems classify targets and flag threats. You let the swarm organize its own formation and reassign roles when one unit is lost. You let software choose alternative paths when GPS drops or a linkage is jammed. Autonomy stops being a luxury and becomes a need. The more drones you have, the less you can afford to have a human in the loop for every micro decision. This is where Erik Prince has been saying the quiet part out loud. Prince is the founder of Blackwater, a former Navy SEAL officer, and these days a loud commentator on military technology. In a March 2025 talk about AI and the future battlefield, he laid out the basic problem in a way that hits you in the gut. Responding to a question about hunter-killer drones using facial recognition, he described how a small drone could be launched and fly around the room looking for the face it's after and drive itself into your forehead, using a tiny explosive charge. That's not a super weapon in a classified program. It's what you can build from commercial components and off-the-shelf AI. Then he went on to contrast elite snipers with cheap FPVs. A world-class sniper might take a cold bore shot at 2,400 yards and hit his target. Impressive, rare, and hard to train. But as Prince put it, any one of you in that student audience could be given 30 minutes of FPV drone instruction and then fly a drone out to 15 kilometers and hit a target. That's the democratization of precision strike. And when he talks about trying to shoot drones down, he complains that the cost of putting a warhead on a forehead or intercepting a cheap drone has become, in his words, so outrageously expensive, like 1,000-fold higher than it should be. And he argues for much cheaper anti-drone hard kill systems. You don't have to buy Prince's politics to see the structural point. The cost of creating a precision threat has collapsed. The cost of defending against it has not. And mass, cheap systems demand autonomy to be usable at all. Once you accept that, you arrive at the real fault line. The battlefield is starting to move at machine speed, but humans still think at human speed. That gap is where instability lives. A drone swarm doesn't get tired. It doesn't wait for coffee. It doesn't wonder if this is politically wise. In realistic systems, a swarm is making dozens of little decisions per second, adjusting position based on turbulence, re-optimizing its internal communications paths, reacting to jamming attempts, recomputing routes as threats are detected, deciding which sensor to trust when some inputs look suspicious. Each of these is a small control decision. None of them feel like escalation, but collectively, they shape what happens. Meanwhile, a human commander, even a very good one, might make one well-considered decision every few minutes. They are looking at filtered summaries, chat messages, partial video clips, maybe a lagging situation map. There is a fundamental tempo mismatch. Machines are reacting at tens of decisions per second. Humans are thinking at a few good decisions per hour. This is similar to high-frequency trading, HFT, where the human is no longer in the cockpit making those split-second calls. Instead, humans set the strategy, risk limits, and circuit breakers once, and then the algorithms operate at microsecond speeds in a distributed, autonomous way. often with no human able to intervene fast enough to stop a bad trade once it's triggered. Modern drone swarm warfare with AI is evolving into the military equivalent of algorithmic trading, and Ukraine is the world's first live proof of concept at scale. This gap means that by the time a human fully understands what just happened, the machines have already taken dozens or hundreds of actions that now have to be rationalized, endorsed, or walked back. In other words, humans are increasingly in the position of interpreting autonomous behavior rather than directing it. And if you want to understand why that's dangerous, you need one more tool in your mental kit: a little bit of control theory. The name control theory sounds intimidating, but the core idea is simple. A system measures something, decides what that measurement means, and reacts. Then it measures again and adjusts. Take a thermostat. It measures the temperature. If the room is cold, it turns the heat on. If the room is hot, it turns the heat off. That feedback loop keeps things stable. But what if the thermometer is slow? The room warms up, but the thermostat still thinks it's cold and keeps heating. Then it overshoots and has to cool down again. The system oscillates. What if someone is opening and closing a window randomly? That external disturbance makes it harder for the system to settle. Now imagine someone is actively trying to fool the thermometer, not that you would, hitting only the area around the sensor or installing a device that sends false readings. The whole measure, decide, act cycle breaks. That's exactly what happens in wartime. Every drone is a little control system. It measures the world through GPS, inertial sensors, cameras, radar, RF links. It then decides how to move or what to target. It acts by steering and maybe firing. The enemy is explicitly trying to break that loop. Electronic warfare tries to corrupt the measurements. Decoys try to trick decisions. Jamming tries to block the signals. Spoofing tries to take over the drone. Now scale this up. Dozens or hundreds of drones all trying to coordinate, all with their control loops, under attack, all making choices at machine speed. Some will drift, some will overcorrect, some will misclassify. And because they are armed, the stakes for each misjudgment are high. That is the control theory lens on drone warfare. Unless you design these feedback loops to be extremely robust, instability is the default. Now, connect that to something you already know from fiction. That's it for this episode of Global Risk Profile. If you found this useful, thoughtful, or just different, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. Remember, the headlines may change, but the deeper patterns rarely do. Thanks for listening, and stay sharp.